They handed her a broken rifle as if the war itself had already chosen her fate. The other soldiers laughed under their breath, shaking their heads, certain she wouldn't last an hour on the battlefield. To them, she was nothing more than a mistake in uniform, a woman carrying a weapon that barely functioned, tossed into the dirt and fire where even the strongest men fell. But she tightened her grip, stared into the dust-filled horizon, and whispered to herself, "If this is all they give me, I'll still find a way." Her name was Lila, and though she was young, the years of loss had already carved something unshakable into her spirit. She had grown up watching her village burn, hearing the cries of her mother silenced in the night, watching her father dragged away in chains. She had nothing left to lose except the fire in her chest, the promise she had made on that broken night, that no one would ever take her dignity, not while she still had breath in her lungs. When the commanders forced her into the ranks, it wasn't because they believed in her. It was because no one else wanted her. They mocked her, gave her the worst gear, and sent her to the farthest edge of the camp. That's where she found the rifle, cracked along the barrel, its trigger loose. It was a weapon meant for the scrap pile, not the battlefield. But it was all she had, and she refused to see it as a curse. She saw it as a challenge. The night before her first mission, she sat by the dim firelight, turning the weapon over and over, studying every inch. Her fingers brushed against the jagged cracks, the stubborn trigger that sometimes jammed. She knew this rifle would never fire the way it was meant to, but she also knew something more important. Wars were not always won by the sharpest blades or the fastest bullets. Sometimes, they were won by the sharpest minds. That night, she remembered her father's words spoken long ago before he disappeared into the prison camps. He had placed his hand on her shoulder and told her, "Courage isn't about the weapon in your hand, Lila. It's about the fire in your heart. Men can strip you of everything, but they can't strip you of that." So, when dawn broke and the commander barked orders for them to move out, she lifted the broken rifle with both hands and walked into the dust. The mission was clear. A ruthless enemy commander had set up base in the nearby hills, guarded by lines of soldiers and barbed wire. Many had tried to take him down, but every attempt had failed. He was ruthless, brilliant, and feared by all. And yet, by some cruel twist, Lila now found herself on the team sent to hunt him. As they marched, the other soldiers pushed past her, sneering. One spat into the dirt and said, "She won't even make it to the valley." Another laughed. "That broken stick she carries is more dangerous to her than to the enemy." But Lila stayed silent. She had learned that silence was stronger than anger. Silence was where strength grew. By midday, the valley stretched before them, a land scarred by trenches and black smoke. The sound of gunfire echoed across the hills, and the air smelled of iron and fear. Layla's heart pounded, but her steps never faltered. She had made a promise to herself, and promises were stronger than fear. When the fighting broke out, it was chaos. Bullets sliced through the air, explosions shook the ground, and men shouted orders that vanished into the roar. Lila ducked behind a crumbled wall, gripping her rifle, knowing it might not fire when she needed it most. She tested the trigger, jammed. She pulled again, still stuck. For a split second, panic clawed at her chest. But then she closed her eyes, forcing her breath steady. She couldn't rely on the rifle. She would have to rely on herself. From her cover, she watched. She studied the way the enemy moved, how they reloaded, where they took shelter. She noticed the commander, standing taller than the rest, barking orders with confidence. He wasn't hiding like his men. He was bold, certain of his power. That arrogance was a weakness, and Layla's eyes locked on him. Hours passed like storms, each moment heavy with danger. Soldiers fell, one after another, and still the commander stood. The men around Lila grew more desperate, more reckless. She could hear them shouting about retreat, about surrender. But Lila's focus never wavered. She wasn't here for glory or survival. She was here for something greater. As dusk approached, the battle thinned. The valley was quieting, shadows stretching long across the ground. Lila crawled forward through the dust, every inch pulling her closer to the commander's position. Her rifle was nearly useless, the barrel cracked, the trigger unreliable. But in her mind, she replayed her father's words, her mother's voice, the fire of every loss she had endured. She reached a ridge overlooking the enemy camp, her heart thundering in her chest. The commander was there, surrounded by guards, his voice steady as he gave orders. He believed he was untouchable. But Lila knew something he didn't. No man is untouchable when facing someone who has nothing left to lose. She raised the broken rifle, aimed carefully, and pulled the trigger. Nothing. Jammed again. Her breath caught in her throat, but she didn't lower the weapon. Instead, she shifted her grip, used the rifle not as a gun but as a tool, a symbol. Crawling closer, she moved like a shadow through the rocks. Every step was a prayer, every breath a memory of those she had lost. Then came the moment. One guard turned, saw her, shouted. The commander's head whipped around, eyes locking on hers. For a heartbeat, the entire world froze. Lila, with her broken rifle clutched tight, stared back at the man who had caused so much pain. The guards rushed forward, guns raised, but Lila didn't run. She sprang up with a speed born of desperation, swinging the cracked rifle like a blade, striking hard. The weapon shattered further in her hands, but she didn't stop. She moved with fury, with precision, using every ounce of strength she had. And somehow, impossibly, she broke through their line. The commander's eyes widened, shocked that this ragged soldier with a broken weapon had reached him. He drew his pistol, steady and sure. Lila's breath was sharp in her throat. This was it, the line between life and death. And just as his finger tightened on the trigger, Lila twisted her body to the side, the bullet searing past her shoulder. Pain shot through her, hot and blinding, but she didn't fall. She lunged forward, swinging the shattered rifle stock with everything left inside her. The wood cracked against the commander's hand, sending the pistol skidding across the dirt. Gasps erupted from the guards around them, stunned that their invincible leader had been disarmed by a soldier with nothing but scraps of a weapon. The commander snarled, grabbing for his knife, but Lila was faster. Years of anger and grief surged through her veins like fire, giving her a strength she didn't know she had. She slammed into him, both of them crashing hard to the ground. Dust rose, the battlefield silenced as if the world itself was watching this moment. They wrestled in the dirt, his strength towering over hers, his rage burning in every movement. He struck her across the face, and stars exploded in her vision, but she refused to let go. She clung to him like her life, her promise. Her very soul depended on it, because it did. He pinned her down, his knife glinting in the dim light, inches from her chest. For an instant, it seemed hopeless, as though the war would end here, with her story buried in the dust. But Lila was not the kind to surrender. With a sudden burst of will, she drove her knee upward, forcing him off balance. His grip loosened, the knife tumbling free. Lila's hand shot out, seizing it before it touched the ground. With trembling arms, she held the blade, pressed against his throat. The mighty commander, feared by thousands, froze beneath the strength of one broken soldier. The guards shouted, raising their guns, but the commander lifted a hand, stopping them. His pride, his arrogance, it wouldn't let him die by a rain of bullets. He wanted to face this moment himself. His eyes met Lila's, and in them, for the first time, she saw fear. Her breath came ragged, her body shaking, her vision blurred with sweat and blood. But her voice was steady when she spoke, low and fierce. This is for every village you burned, every life you crushed, every family you tore apart. The valley was still, the world holding its breath. And then, with one swift motion, it was over. Silence followed, heavier than any explosion. The commander lay still, the knife slipping from her hand. The guards, stunned and leaderless, dropped their weapons one by one. Some fled into the shadows, others sank to their knees. The battle that had raged since morning ended not with an army's might, but with the unyielding courage of a girl who had been given a broken rifle. Lila staggered to her feet, swaying, her body bruised and battered, but her spirit unbroken. Around her, the other soldiers from her unit emerged from cover, their eyes wide, their disbelief raw. The same men who had mocked her, laughed at her, dismissed her as useless, now they looked at her with awe. Not because she had killed a commander, but because she had done it with nothing but willpower and determination. One soldier stepped forward, voice trembling. She did it, another whispered, with that broken gun. And slowly, as if the weight of truth pressed upon them, they began to bow their heads. Respect, long denied to her, finally found its way into their eyes. The sun dipped behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of fire and ash. Layla stood there, silhouetted against the fading light, her chest rising and falling, her broken rifle still clutched in her hand like a banner of defiance. She wasn't just a survivor, she was a symbol. Word of her victory spread faster than wildfire. By the time they returned to camp, the story had already reached every tent, every corner of the field. Soldiers gathered, whispering about the girl who had taken down the enemy commander with a weapon that should never have worked. They called her fearless. They called her impossible. Some even called her a miracle. But Lila didn't care for names or glory. That night, as the camp celebrated, she sat alone under the stars, staring at the broken rifle in her lap. To anyone else, it was still useless wood and metal. To her, it was proof that strength wasn't about the weapon, it was about the heart that carried it. She closed her eyes and thought of her parents, of the promise she had made when everything was taken from her. A tear slipped down her cheek, but this time, it wasn't from sorrow. It was from fulfillment. She had kept her word. She had turned loss into strength. In the days that followed, the war began to shift. The enemy, without their ruthless commander, faltered. Villages long trapped in chains were freed. Hope, fragile and trembling, began to return to the land. And everywhere soldiers marched, they carried with them the story of the girl with the broken rifle. Many years later, when the war was only a memory and the land had healed, her story was still told. Mothers whispered it to their children at night. Young fighters drew strength from it when they felt weak. And her name, once mocked and dismissed, became a song of courage. But Lila herself never boasted of what she had done. She never claimed to be a hero. When people asked her how she had defeated the commander, she always gave the same quiet answer. They handed me a broken rifle, but they didn't know I wasn't broken. And in those words lived the truth she had carried all her life, that weapons may fail, strength may fade, and the world may try to crush you, but the heart that refuses to give up can change everything. Because in the end, her victory wasn't just about the fall of one man. It was about proving that even when the world hands you nothing but shards and scraps, you can still turn them into something powerful. You can still rise. You can still fight. And sometimes even a broken rifle is enough to change history.